So I'd like to welcome to our stage for the second time, Ms. Dayna Martin. Start it right away.
Yeah. I'm showing you guys a video that really means a lot to me. And I think you've heard this song before, but I don't know if you've ever really listened to the lyrics, so I'd like you to listen to the lyrics. What would you all say if I told you that almost everybody here at this event was abused as a child? Would you believe me? It's interesting because I think a lot of people understand abuse to a certain degree. I think they understand physical abuse. We've even come so far as a culture that we understand emotional abuse. But one of the biggest aspects of abuse that people don't really look at is control. And control starts really, really young. We start controlling people in our culture from the moment we're conceived, actually, that you were controlled in your mother's womb. And let me explain what I mean by that. The industry of birth right now in our culture, it's really interesting because I love talking to a group like this because I know you guys get it. But when I share about these things with the average person who's pregnant, they can think it's pretty extreme and pretty radical, but you guys you're all so radical. You'll get this really, really easily. When a woman's pregnant in our culture, the first thing women say to each other is, like you'll hear a friend is pregnant, and you can't wait to tell her how awful your labor was and how long you labored. We have a competition with women in our culture about suffering. My labor was 30 hours, and they had to pull the baby out of me, and the baby had to be cut out, and then the baby's heart rate stopped. And it's unbelievable how, as a culture, we compete with our victimization. Who suffered the most wins. part of my mission on this earth is to help people understand that the only way we're going to bring more peace and freedom and love into this world is to support each other. But support starts with birth. It truly does. And I know a lot of you don't have children yet. There's a lot of men here, and I love to educate men about birth for their future partners if you ever decide to have a baby. But even bigger than that, even if you don't have kids, you were a baby. You were born. You were children. So all of you need to hear this kind of message. What do you think would happen if a woman was laboring in a jungle and she was like squatting, holding onto a tree in labor? What do you think would happen if she looked far away and saw a tiger walking by? Like, what do you think would just naturally happen to her labor? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Her labor would stop. That's a really, really normal protective mechanism in all mammals. It's supposed to happen to save us. So what do you think happens when a woman goes into a hospital when she's in labor? Her labor becomes really dysfunctional. It's supposed to happen. It's scary. It's a fearful place. But what happens when a woman goes into the hospital in labor and labor gets dysfunctional is the doctor or nurse looks at her and says, oh my God, you need drugs. Something's going wrong. Your body's not working. We need to give you Pitocin to speed everything up and to get you back on track. But they don't tell you that Pitocin causes the baby's heart rate to elevate. It squeezes your uterus unnaturally. It causes so many issues that happen in labor today. So they give a woman Pitocin, the baby's heart rate elevates. They tell you, oh my gosh, your baby's in distress. We need to give you a C-section. So for a doctor right now in our culture, they receive about $30,000 to get a C-section, and they do it in 20 minutes. Or they get about $4,000 to sit there and wait for the baby to be born naturally. And it could take days. So obviously a C-section is much more common. Do you know the C-section rate right now is 40%? So 40% of women in our culture have a C-section. Do you know in Mexico, it's 65% right now of women get a C-section? So isn't that crazy? Yeah, so what happened to our bodies that we can't deliver our babies naturally? Well, nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's a famous midwife, I don't know if you've ever heard of her, Ina May Gaskin. You guys know now. She, in the 60s, she opened a place called The Farm, which is a midwifery center in Tennessee. It's huge. People travel from all over the world to give birth there. Her C-section rate is 2%, which is natural. Like, thank goodness there's hospitals for the 1 or 2% of women that actually need them. But in our culture today, birth is big business. It's $1 billion business. Not only that, but this is really amazing to me that the government tries to separate mother and child from the beginning. And hospitals are a big key to this separation, because if a mother doesn't have time or the opportunity to bond with her baby, then it's really, really easy to influence mothers to doubt themselves and to turn to experts to parent and to put their kids in school and so forth. So with a natural birth, mothers and fathers get to bond with their baby. They get to connect. The first 2 hours, something happens called imprinting, where mothers and babies and fathers and babies, they have this amazing time together to connect and bond. And that instinct is what really kicks in, where you can hear and understand your baby, to know what your baby wants. But in our culture today, it's not like that. It's an emergency. You need to rescue the baby from all these distressing things that the hospital actually causes. And so it becomes, from the very beginning, this distant separation between mother and child. So what happens is when mothers don't have time to birth their babies or don't have the opportunity to birth their babies naturally, I need a second. This is very emotional for me. And so I get really dizzy when I get emotional and nervous, because I only recently started educating about birth with unschooling, because I found it really important to share this with people so they understand what's happening. It's really easy for mothers to give up their kids to the state when they never have that bonding connection. And you know, I'm willing to bet that most of you have had a pretty dysfunctional childhood, and I want you to kind of be easy on your mothers and your fathers with that, because it wasn't their fault, the part in the beginning where they were supposed to bond with you, but they were never allowed to. And so when you don't bond with your kids, you don't have that connection to be able to listen to them. You don't have that instinctual response to be able to hear what they have to say, and you have to turn to other people. You have to turn to experts to even know what to do, because from the very beginning, that was robbed of you. So I just wanted to share that little bit about birth, that in the beginning, if you're not able to do that, things go terribly wrong in the parent-child relationship. And so have you ever heard of home birth? Have you considered home birth? Yeah, you have? Did you have your babies at home? No? I'm a midwife, so I deliver babies. Actually, right now, just pretty much anarchist and libertarian babies. So I travel all over the country. I delivered a baby in Mexico. I'm going to Utah to help women have babies naturally, under their own power. I don't even want to deliver them necessarily. I just want to be there to support the woman. But when a mother brings her baby into this world in her own power, she's able to tap into what she's meant to tap into. And so she listens to her baby. What I educate about is a peaceful parenting partnership, which is really different than the authoritarian partnership that we live in. It's not even a partnership, the authoritarian paradigm right now that our culture lives in. So 99% of parenting books on the market today are focused on obedience and compliance. They're focused on behavior modification and how to get your child to meet your needs. It's not focused on the child's needs at all. We focus on timeouts and how to control another human being. And that really happens when you're in a hospital and your baby needs to be rescued because you don't know how to deliver it under your own power. Then you think your body was broken. You say to yourself, as a woman, my body didn't work properly. I'm not capable of even birthing this baby. How could I parent it? And then you turn to experts and say, what do I do? So then a mother lets her baby cry it out because she's told not to hold it too much, to make sure that the baby cries because that's good for its lungs. The baby's crying to its mother, mom, hold me, feed me. But the mother doesn't trust her instinct because she needs to turn to experts who say, no, that child will manipulate you. That child is going to manipulate you and con you into getting what it wants, and you don't want that. You want to sever that right from the beginning. But what happens is the more a woman dulls that instinct within her and doesn't listen to it, that inner voice becomes more and more silent. After a while, you don't hear it anymore. And so you don't have that innate ability to be able to meet your child's needs. So never mind trying to educate your child at home. You can't even fathom being capable of doing that. So then you put your child in school. And so from the very beginning, that bond is broken. That self-doubt creeps in if you can't birth your baby the way you're meant to. You put your baby in a crib to cry it out. You punish your child. You put it in timeout. Have you guys ever seen that show like Nanny 911 or any of those super nanny type of shows where they train parents in how to train their kids? Do you know that if you were on a deserted island alone with your children, you would never, ever parent them the way that you're trained to train your kids in our culture? It's not natural. It's not natural to ignore the needs and the cries of another human being. But the overall agenda is really evil. Because if we can train parents in our culture to train children and to not meet the child's needs, the child gets used to their needs not being met. And so they then live their lives doing the same thing. So history is repeated over and over and over again. When I gave birth to my son, Devin, so let me just tell you for a minute, for those of you that don't know me, I have 4 kids. I have a 10-year-old son, Orion. I have a 13-year-old daughter, Ivy. I have a 16-year-old daughter, Tiffany. And I have a 19-year-old son, Devin. And currently, Devin's girlfriend lives with us. So I have 5 kids with me. They're all unschooled. So my kids have all been born naturally. Devin was born in a hospital with a midwife. I had Tiffany and Ivy at home. And then with my son, Orion, I had an unassisted birth. So I birthed him by myself, delivered him by myself. There were midwives downstairs that came up to help me afterward. But my kids have never been to school, which, I mean, you guys are all radical. You understand that's not that big of a deal. But my children have also never been punished. They've never been parented punitively, ever. So they never had things taken away from them. They've never been grounded. They've never been told, you can't watch that TV show, you can't do this, you can't do that. My kids have had freedom in every area of their lives from the very beginning. My kids have never had food controlled. They've never had technology or media controlled. They've never had bedtimes controlled. They've always had the freedom from the beginning of life to go to bed when they want. They can eat whatever they want. I'm really curious. I love when I say that because I want to know what people are thinking. Because what you're thinking right now goes to show how conditioned you are. Is anybody brave enough to share what they're thinking if it's really scary or fearful? Yeah? Yeah. Has anyone met my kids? Actually, Brian's been to my house. You stayed with my family. Was it totally crazy? Were kids punching each other and things being thrown all over the house? Yeah, it was pretty calm. It's funny because your conditioning goes to show how controlled you were. Because we were told when we were kids that child's parents didn't love them because they had freedom. We were told that child's not spanked, they're not loved. We were told that we're doing this for your own good. We're doing this because I love you. And it's one of the biggest lies in our culture that really warped our minds, because we knew deep down from when we were 2 and 3 years old, we knew that that was wrong. There was something inside of us saying, that's not love, you're hurting me. How can that be love? Most people never wake up from that. In fact, it's really painful for people to face what they went through as children. And so a lot of people, when they hear me, they think I'm crazy, and I'm used to that. I've been on television, different television shows for the last decade. I was on the Dr. Phil show. It was filmed by Oprah. I was on Nightline. My family was on the show Wife Swap. Have you seen that show? Did anybody see that episode? That was crazy. But I also, I know part of the process of change is for people to think you're crazy and to laugh in the beginning. That's the very first. People laugh, they think you're crazy. Then slowly it's more accepted, and eventually it's accepted as normal. So I'm willing to be in the laughing phase right now for the greater good, for people to understand this life. But just to bring it back to what I was talking about, I think a lot of people hear that if you don't control your children, what they're doing, and punish them and give them limits, that they're going to make crazy choices. I've heard people say it's going to be anarchy, and I'm like, yes, it is. But you don't know what anarchy is. So I just want to share with you that kids that are given freedom and trusted from the beginning make really good choices for themselves. You all have freedom right now to be sitting with a whole bag of cookies if you wanted, right? Would you? I'd kind of like a cookie right now, too. But you have the freedom to eat it when you want, and so you don't overindulge. You don't, well, sometimes we do, don't we? But a lot of us overindulge because of our control as children. We really do. You know, when you're controlling something that a child is doing or eating, it warps the relationship with whatever's being controlled. Because our innate desire for freedom will override everything. We want freedom more than anything else. All humans do. Children are born with a desire for freedom. And so when you're telling them, you can only have one of this, their desire to be like, fuck you, I want the whole bag. I have freedom. I'm going to eat that whole bag just to prove to you that I want freedom. So kids overindulge in things, the same with television, the same with media. If you try to control it, their innate desire for freedom will override what they want to do, and their goal will be whatever you're forbidding, because they really, really want to feel that freedom. So what happens in that relationship is parents think that's all the child is going to do. Because if they say, okay, fine, eat what you want, the child will just want their freedom so much they will overindulge. They'll do things that they're not ready for. How many of you did things you weren't ready for, or overindulged, or snuck around? We all did, probably. When something is controlled and you don't have freedom surrounding it, it warps the human condition. We become people we didn't want to be. We lie, we cheat, we steal, and we manipulate. We become people that we then don't really like, and we feel shame and guilt. Because we were controlled, we become human beings that other people warn us about. We were those kids that other parents said, we don't want my kid hanging out with that one. We were those kids, many of us. Because a lot of us are rebels, we're natural-born rebels, we're drawn to this movement, we want to educate people about this kind of thing. And I just want to share with you that if you're here at this talk, there's a very good chance that you either are or could become an advocate for either something I'm speaking about or something that's spoken about here. This event raises people into a movement itself. We're on the leading edge of thought. We're all pioneers in this movement, and we're talking about things that people laugh about, that people say we're crazy, even speaking about or bringing to each other. But I want to encourage all of you to become advocates yourself for whatever you heard here over the course of this weekend. What did you hear that really triggered something in you where you want to talk about it and share with others? Because this is the only way we're going to educate and change the world, is talking about these things. So when my son Devin was born in the hospital, I couldn't believe I did it, that I had a natural birth. I was so afraid. There was nobody that really supported me, but I knew I really, really wanted to birth him naturally. My childhood was common, I guess, dysfunctional, bad, for the most part, and I wanted my child to have something differently. So when I became pregnant, it was a chance to start my whole life over. I felt like I could start and be a good person and start from the beginning. So I gave birth to him naturally. I was holding him for the first time. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I did it. And I was holding this human. Like, when you're pregnant, you have a baby inside you, but once you're holding the human being, you still can't believe that there was a human in you. It's the weirdest thing. It's like, wow, there really was a baby inside of me, or I'm holding it. Well, I sat down and the nurses turned on the television, which I don't really know why they did. They didn't even ask me. They just turned on the TV. And the Columbine shootings were happening live within minutes after I held my son for the first time. And everybody that was in that room, there was 3 nurses, family, they all turned to the TV, and I couldn't believe what they were showing live on the television. That's another whole discussion, isn't it? The media and how crazy it is. But I was watching kids jumping out of windows. I was watching mothers, they were filming the mothers crying whose children were killed and were inside. And I was holding my son and looking down at him, and I just remember time stopping. I remember something happened during that time where I knew that I was here for a reason, and it was the first time I ever felt true purpose. So what started me thinking about it was that moment where I saw these mothers and kids, and I thought to myself for the first time, how many of those parents and how many of those children would have preferred to have been together that day, but weren't confident enough to, or they didn't think they had the option? And how many of them would have loved to have done fun things together over the course of the child's entire childhood? And that's when I looked down at my son and I thought, for the very first time, he will always have the choice to go to school or not. He will always have the choice. All choice in his life will be his. And I just had that awareness. And so I never thought of it as, I don't want my kids to get shot, so I'm not going to send them to school. It wasn't a fear-based decision. It was a children's rights and freedom decision in that moment. I talk to parents all the time who say to me, I could never do what you do. I could never homeschool. And I say, well, why? Why do you think you couldn't? And they say, I can't even imagine. God, it's so exhausting having to force them to do their homework and brush their teeth and do all these. It's exhausting. And I said, it's not homeschooling that you couldn't do. What you need to do is let go of control. It's not joyful or pleasant in any way, shape, or form to control another human being all day, every day. It's not. It's awful. So who the hell would want to add, unschooling, homeschooling on the pile if they're already living that life of trying to control another human being? So the really important thing to do is to understand that the type of life that I promote, living out a peaceful parenting partnership, is joy-based. It's based on meeting the needs of everybody in the family equally, not just the adults. But this life is not for the lazy parent. The interesting thing is when somebody hears that I unschool, they think I'm lazy, first and foremost, because they hear that they think I'm uneducating. But what I'm doing is I'm not doing school. I'm not using the institution of school at all, because the institution of school is a depressing, negative, disrespectful environment that I would never put my kids through. They have the freedom and choice to go, though. They could. I would support if they wanted to. But what human being would ever put themselves in a situation where they're forced to obey and comply with other people's agenda all day, every day? My kids have never wanted that. They've always had freedom. They would never slip into that situation well. How many of you didn't like school? What didn't you like about it? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, made fun of, bullied. Exactly. Yeah. That's a really important aspect, definitely, of freedom, is we're not all meant to learn the same things in life. Who thought of that concept? Well, I know. Brett knows. We know who thought of the concept of putting a child in school. Exactly. Schools were designed to train people to be good workers for the government, to be worker bees, essentially. People don't know that. Do you know when schools first started in the 1800s, that they had to force parents by gunpoint? 83% of parents refused to put their child in school when compulsory schooling started. And they were forced by gunpoint to bring their children to school. Think of where we've come from that point to the point where we were actually so manipulated that we think it's good for our kids now. We've been so coerced, so manipulated that parents think they're doing the right thing. That's how good control is over the course of years. So think about it. When the whole idea came to be, it was absurd. Parents could not even believe that this is something that was suggesting that we have to force our child to do this all day, every day in the most unnatural, disrespectful environment. So I believe that we can get back to that place of trusting our instinct and not putting children through this anymore. Because nowadays with the internet, learning is everywhere. You couldn't keep a child from learning if you tried. that learning is like breathing. And we've been so conditioned to see things in schooly terms that we actually only value what the government tells us to value for learning. And I bet even you do, a lot of you probably still do. You don't realize how much deconditioning and unbrainwashing you have to do to see value in learning other things other than the school subjects. So we think of math, English, science, history, all of these things are as the most important. And then anything else children are doing, we just excuse as not good enough, or we don't value it or honor it. It's really important to take off these schooly lenses to be able to get to a point where you can see everything your children are doing as valuable. But it takes a lot of, you have to really get used to being judged by other people. My daughter Ivy, does anyone follow me online? Have you ever seen my daughter Ivy? She's 13. She is like what people would consider goth. She's very extreme looking. And so when people see her walking around with me, I just get used to people staring at us. And people, interestingly enough, I have a lot of older women compliment how Ivy dresses and who she is. She's the most sweet, compassionate girl. She's an animal activist. I wish she was here with me. She does travel with me sometimes, so you could see who she is as a person. But she goes into grocery stores and stands in the meat section holding up videos of factory farming until she gets kicked out. Now, that's not something I would do. I don't believe in that type of advocacy. I don't. But I support her in doing it completely because she has freedom, and it's part of my job. Part of my job is to facilitate my children in their passions and interests. That's my role. I'm not their teacher. I'm not standing in front of them pouring knowledge into them as the all-knowing authority, because I don't believe in that. I believe that my role is to facilitate their learning by bringing as many resources into their lives to learn and grow from based on their interests. Now, this has changed and evolved so much over the years for me with my kids. My son, Devin, who's 19, he is a computer game developer, but he's also a professional blacksmith. He makes knives and swords and sells them on eBay. He also makes clothing. He made clothing for movie sets. He does for the Viking series. He makes authentic Viking clothing. He like looms. He has a loom, and I don't even know what to call half of it. You guys probably know more than me, some of you dudes. But he makes his own clothing and then makes reenactment clothing. So all of this is completely self-taught. And if I only had Devin, my 19-year-old, I would have thought I was the best unschooling mom that ever lived, because he's like the perfect example of natural learning. But what's challenging is when you have children that don't look impressive to other people necessarily, and people judge it. So my daughter Tiffany, okay, she's 16. She has been highly sensitive and intense her whole life. Her whole life. She was born being really highly sensitive and very intense. She went a different route. She's a professional model, and she does makeup and hair, and she sings on YouTube, and she rejects everything that most of our family lives, interestingly enough, meaning she's really into kind of more mainstream culture. So before she got into modeling, like I was the type of mom in the beginning that was like, I want my girls to be empowered, I don't want them to be objectified, and she's just like, I want to model, I want to make money off my looks. And so it took me a lot to overcome to be able to support her, but I fully support her and everything she does. And then Ivy is my 13-year-old, like I said, into goth culture and animal advocacy. And then my son Orion is into gaming, and he loves anything to do with history and dinosaurs. And I won't bore you. I won't be one of those moms of, here's how great my kids are, because honestly, every child born in our culture, every child born is a genius. Every child is meant to do something individual and unique. Is anybody in a profession that they learned from school? How many of you were working doing something that had nothing to do with your education? I think most of us. Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? There's so little that's necessary that kids are learning at school that we then need to adopt. But the intention of school is to keep kids away from the real world and to keep them kind of locked up in a way while adults do their adult things, and because they're too much of a nuisance and inconvenient. And people say to me all the time, how are your kids going to learn how to be in the real world? Have any of you heard that with homeschoolers? It's so amazing, isn't it? Because I say, your kids are in a brick building all day, every day, for 12 years, kept away from society. My kids are out in the real world, living, connecting. They're not age segregated. Do you guys know how bad age segregation is? Do you understand what age segregation is and how damaging? Wow, isn't it? Can you think back to when you were in 4th grade? I know, right? Can you think back to when you were like, you couldn't hang out with the 6th graders if you were in 4th grade? And you definitely couldn't hang out with the 2nd graders if you were in 4th grade. You were taught to hang out with your same age mates. Now, what if I just said right now, like, I can only really speak today to other 45-year-olds, okay? So I'm sorry if you're 45, you can hang out and listen, but I'm just not comfortable around anybody else. I mean, it's ridiculous. When do we ever ask anybody's age? We connect as human beings by common interest. And I'm giving my kids so much of a bigger world by teaching them about that you connect with people based on common interests rather than people the same age. Devin, for a long time, one of his best friends was like this 80-year-old lady up the street. It was really sweet. He would go and see her almost every day, and he would bring her treats, and she taught him how to make bread, and she would talk to him about what it was like when she was little. He was always really interested in that kind of thing. But then he'd have no problem hanging out with 3- and 4-year-olds either. He had such a huge social circle. Children that have freedom and that are living this life, their social circle is huge. We're giving our kids an enormous world based on not age segregating. Because when you age segregate and you're forcing kids in a situation with other people the same age, life becomes much smaller. And people say, what about socialization? Isn't that like the number one question? Do you guys ever think about that? Yeah, it's crazy when people ask me that. The first person to really ask me that was Dr. Phil on stage. He said, what about socialization? And it's the number one question, but people ask these questions to unschoolers and kids that have freedom because they're blanket statements. They're not really thinking about it, and I'll just say, well, what about it? Well, how are they going to learn to get along with people they don't like? And I just say they don't like somebody. They're not forced to spend time with them. You have the freedom to leave when you're not forced in that situation. Where, like, when people are saying, what about socialization? They're generally saying, how is your child going to cope with it being abused if they're not abused now? How are they going to cope being controlled when they're older? That's truly what they're asking. And my kids never have to go through that, and hopefully your kids don't either. So it's really important for me, we're a smaller group, that I meet the needs of everybody here. And this topic, from peaceful parenting and unschooling and birth, is very huge. This is the very tip of the iceberg with what I want to share with all of you. But I really want to address any questions that you have. And so I can perfectly cater this talk to this individual group with questions. So please ask away. There's no question that's stupid. Please ask me anything, and I'm here as a resource for you.
I didn't really have a question, but I just want to make a quick comment on what you just said. My thought would be that they would be better equipped to handle an abusive environment if they weren't conditioned to just take it. They'd be more likely to stand up for themselves, more likely to seek an exit from the situation, and less likely to just live a life of being abused and think that that's normal and just what they have to put up with for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. If they have a boss that is treating them horribly, they won't think that that's a normal way to go about living, and then they will find a way to make it stop, whether it's confronting the boss, telling the boss what they're doing wrong, or maybe just making a peaceful exit.
Yeah, that's so important. I'm so glad you said that, because that is the point of conditioning children. That's the point, is when we numb people to think that it's normal to be controlled and abused, then they just slip into the next part of life into abusive situations. We were conditioning children in school to be good factory workers. When you train children to be yes men, it's so much easier to control them through their whole lives. And not only that, but like I told you, the really important part, like starting with birth, is that self-doubt that mothers have in babies and that disconnection. When you can start self-doubt and fear and not listening to your instinct from birth, then most people go their whole lives without ever knowing. Just like I love this Metallica video because of that, because it shares that. That's what happens. Your entire life goes by, and all of a sudden you realize, I don't even know who I was. I just did what I was told. I was told I was doing everything right. Why wasn't I ever happy? And so, yeah, that's really important.
So my daughter was homeschooled by her mother in a Baptist religious kind of structured thing. So my daughter was My daughter was homeschooled by her mother and kind of a religious, we were divorced. So I thought they did pretty good, but they didn't really like it. My son ended up going to regular school. My daughter I have 2 little granddaughters, and she's very much against homeschooling, and I try to give her some ideas here and there, and my granddaughters are really smart. You can see the intricate ways they play with their toys, and the one's going to be 5, and she's just going into a preschool or something. So just wondering if you have any ideas how I can kind of bring more of this to this direction. She lives in a different state. I try to say things to her, but you can't, push them.
I mean, freedom starts with modeling respect for me with my children. And forced learning of any kind, obviously people are going to resist. Always ask, but if you invite somebody into a conversation and say, hey, if you want to hear my opinion and some alternatives, I'm happy to share it with you. So you need to kind of be invited in, because if you're forcing an opinion on somebody about this type of life, the natural instinct is to resist. So I think just asking politely, hey, if you want to hear a different perspective, buying people books, that's my favorite way to do it, is to buy people books and just kind of slip them a book and it's there, or sending websites. That's a really important thing. So I'm happy to talk to you individually too after and share some ideas as well. But yeah, for peaceful parenting, I wrote one. But there's a lot out there. Yeah, I have 10 books with me. That's it. So whoever wants one after, you could see me or Leif, and he'll help you out with that. Yeah, there's a lot of different books. Nonviolent communication. Now, there's 2 components to radical unschooling, which I educate about. And one is the peaceful parenting side of it, and the other is the educational freedom with learning. So it depends on what you're focused on. Do you want peaceful parenting? Do you want to educate about natural learning? There's so many books on both sides, definitely. But I'm happy to actually set up a book list for you guys and put it on the website. I can post it on the group event website. Okay.
Thank you, Dayna.
You're welcome.
Do any of your kids ever second guess your decision, or do they ever kind of wonder what life is like on the other side, since it's been so different for them compared to the whole tribe, everyone you meet when you're just out and about who's been through public school and all these things?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So over the course of our lifetime, I really believe in you build your community and people will come. So I've always created community of other parents who are respecting their kids for my kids to spend time with. But because they're in the real world, the interesting thing is television. Because there's so, like Nickelodeon and Disney Channel, it's very punitive, all the parenting that's modeled in all these shows. So my kids have been surrounded in it, and we talk about it. They don't really get along all that great with kids that have been parented authoritarianly, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm just going to give a short example. There was one time where my son had a neighbor over, and they were jumping on our trampoline. And the little boy had grabbed the top of the trampoline net and accidentally ripped it off. And he said, oh no. And Devin said, I'm going to go get my mom. And he said, please don't get your mom. And Devin was like, why? My mom will fix it? I don't understand at all. What's going on? He's like, please don't, because she'll tell my mom and then I'll be grounded. And Devin said, what's grounded? What does that mean? And he was like, oh, I won't be able to watch TV. I won't be able to do this. And my son afterward came to me and said, what is this? And so there have been moments where we've had to have this discussion where it's astounding to my kids that other people don't have freedom. Just like when you have a friend or somebody who's in a very, very controlling, abusive relationship, you hear what they go through and you're like, how the hell how could you have gone through that? How could you even put up with that? People are so conditioned to put up with a lot, and it's like boiling a frog. Before you know it, you are in it. You are deep in it, and you look around at your life like, what am I doing? So my kids have been immersed in an authoritarian culture. They understand it. But my daughter Tiffany explained it she didn't understand hanging out with other teenagers, that they were so sneaky and that they would, she went to a fair with a bunch of them and they were stealing things from the vendors. And Tiffany said, why are you stealing that ring, to her friend? And she said, because I can. And she said, I'll give you $10, just go buy it. These people, this is their business and you're taking money from them. And they were all just doing things that really astounded her. So with freedom, kids aren't forced to do these things. Like I said, lie, cheat, and steal. But my kids have been around it their whole lives. They don't like it. Yeah, it's not a good thing. So.
Yeah, there are two words you use that I find that's very good. You talk about modeling behavior, and you also talk about facilitation. That's one of the things, even though I was formally trained as a Montessorian, what happens is when you do that, the children learn to make decisions, and you came up with something that's real key about kids who are able to be in a world with people. Even when there's not a way, kids will make a way for themselves. Whereas a lot of times when people are traditionally educated, if they feel like they're not being successful, they tend to give up because they can't think outside that box to bring them to a conclusion to move forward. And I was formally educated, and so were my kids. But when I came to the realization of how education works, I came to the same conclusion you came to. And also, I was real surprised because I didn't know you did all the birthing things. I'm also involved with that as a doula, though, on both ends.
Great. Yeah, that's so wonderful. There's another girl here that's training to be a doula.
Yeah.
Maybe next year here we can have like a birth support group and educate people about it, because I think it's really interesting. Thank you so much for what you shared.
So I don't know if my position or perspective is very unique from a lot of other fathers, but I've got two daughters. They live with their mom, and she's totally immersed in the servile society. She works for the public school system. I only came to realize liberty, after they were about 6. My oldest was about 6. My youngest was about 4. So it feels like the trauma had already occurred. And at this point, it's like I want to be there to kind of guide them towards being more individualistic, but they don't live with me. And so I find it really challenging to try and present these ideas, because it's like literally the only thing I ever talk to them about, to the point where they're like, "Oh, shut up, Dad. We don't care anymore." It feels like I've tainted the well or something when I try to bring up these ideas and concepts. And I think, can you speak on how to walk it back once you've already established that piss poor relationship? Especially because a lot of us that try to advocate liberty, we're too harsh, too rough, too brash, and a lot of people they just don't want to hear it. They're not open to it. So can you talk about how to kind of walk it back, or what you can do, what techniques you can do from a liberty perspective to kind of reintroduce that and take a different approach?
I think you need to let go of the idea that your kids will adopt your same beliefs, because part of freedom is freedom of mind and freedom that they have the freedom to believe whatever they want. My daughter Tiffany, who's 16, is now dating a boy who's Christian, and which to me, I'm so sorry, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but for his parents are very strict Christian with punishments and sin, and all of that's brought into Tiffany's life, and they bought her a Bible. And so she said, I really want to read the Bible. I want to explore all of this. No, it's really interesting. For me, because I need to support her in that. And I do. I facilitate that for her. I tell her I'll bring her to church if she wants to learn more about it. But she knows how I feel and that I don't share those beliefs. I would definitely say the best way to educate children about this is to live it. Model this for them. Treat them respectfully. All these, this philosophical approach, adopt it, and allow them the freedom to think what they need to think about. But at the same time, you're living your beliefs as a libertarian. You're living liberty, you're living anarchy, you're living freedom, and talk openly about that. I know a lot of single dads are really struggling with that kind of thing, because a lot of times the mothers parent authoritarianly, punitively. But I'll tell you that your girls, are they both girls, are better off having 50% of their parent educating them and living this life than 99.9% of kids on this planet. In our culture right now, kids are so controlled, and so you're already doing better than most people, because 50% of their parent is living this way. So I would just let go of the fear surrounding it. You don't need to get your girls to believe anything about liberty. The only way that you'll give it a chance where they'd be open to it is if you don't try to force them to learn it. Even coercive, manipulative, even the most peaceful seeming approach, they don't want to talk about it anymore. The worst thing you could do is continue to, if you want to put them off of it. So just let it go. Think about what you believed when you were that age. I mean, I was raised Baptist, Christian. I wanted to be a minister when I grew up. That was like my goal for like first couple years of my life. That's what the first thing I ever wanted to be. It was only because it made everyone happy. Isn't that funny? I wanted to be loved and to be accepted. And my grandmother loved that I said that. It had nothing to do with what I really wanted. So I think it's really important to know how much people have changed. Like, think of your own journey, how you got here. How did you get here? You needed to live a completely different paradigm and see how much it sucked before you could ever come to a more open-minded place. Your girls may need to go through that. They may need to, because they need the experience of contrast to make an informed decision. So my daughter Tiffany, like getting the Bible, going to church, making these choices, I know in my heart that she needs to feel that. She needs to experience everything that's involved in that, so I support it. I support her journey. She's not going to not do it because I say church is bad or and all of that. So trust the process, step back far enough to see the broader perspective, to say kids have to go through this in order to come into a more open mindset. So letting go of control, and really especially please let go of the fear surrounding it, because all is well. All is well. You're doing great. So that's what I'd like to say about that. Okay? Thank you.
You might have just answered my question.
Okay.
Although it's also not well formed. I have one son, and he's about 3 years old, and right now he's really, you can tell he's really craving more autonomy, more freedom, and I am just having a lot of personal inner struggle to how I can be the best parent. And dude, I've already started to cry a couple times during your talk, because I'm really struggling with just how to proceed, because I really do want to allow him freedom. I want to allow him, in all aspects, food is a big hang up for me. Sleep, that's a big hang up for me, media and these other things. And I notice that he seems to do better, having a routine and having some structure. Seems to give him more ease, but there's also a whole lot of pushback, and I can appreciate it. And I wonder sometimes if I'm making it worse because I'm not really fully committed one way or the other, and not being, the confident leader that he needs. And I'm just, I'm not sure how to proceed, the bedtimes and things like that. We have a pretty good structured routine. And, if I just, experiment sometimes, we'll just let it go. We'll see how this goes. And it's, it's worse, It's
important to realize how control works, though. Mm-hmm. Control really causes children to distrust you. And so a parent that's kind of trying things out and they release control for a short time, a child will want to do nothing but what was being limited, and they never know when you're going to put limits back on because they haven't rebuilt that trust. And so they're going to want to they'll stay up till 6 a.m, they'll stay up all night, they'll do nothing but want to eat what you've given freedom surrounding. They will put the TV on all day, every day, while you've temporarily lifted these limits. That is not true balance, and do not judge that on how it would really be with freedom, because that's part of the process of healing. Kids need to heal from control because it's damaging, it's abusive, and straight up, it is. And so all human beings need to heal from that. And the other aspect is, just because you physically lift the limits on something, if you're still fearful and you're not totally behind that and you're still feeling fear, your kids feel that. That is control in itself, and it's damaging. When you walk into a room, guys, and you instantly know whether you like somebody or not without them saying a word. You feel it. You're like, ooh, I don't trust that person, or ooh, I really like her. Kids feel your energy, and also if you're telling them they can do something, but then you're not really behind it and you're fearful, okay, you can have that whole box of cookies or whatever you're feeling, and you really feel, oh God, this is awful. It's modeling dishonesty, and distrust starts. And so in order to really get an idea of what freedom looks like, time has to go by long enough for somebody to find balance with something. Because my kids don't spend all day every day doing things any different than I would in that way, because they've always had freedom with it. I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of parents for the last 15 years, and the concerns that you bring up and what you're doing is the most common. And people can heal from that and work through that. So with these individual situations, I'm really happy to talk to you, one-on-one if you'd like to chat about it more. But I think the most helpful way to help somebody is to hear, what do you do now? What does it look like? And here's an alternative. So you're not confusing him necessarily. That's another cultural mindset and conditioning of consistency. You need to be consistent. You need to do the same thing and get everybody behind you doing the same thing. That's control. It's not true. The only thing that you need to worry about having consistency in is your unconditional love. your love for your child. You consistently love him. And it's okay to talk and be honest. I think honesty and authenticity is one of the biggest aspects of this parenting, to just tell him how you're feeling and just be like, I'm just really freaked out that if I let you eat whatever you want, that you're going to eat that whole box of cookies. Do you think you will? Like, what do you think would happen if you did? And really just lay your feelings on the table. Be vulnerable around your kids. Now, that's something that we're also told never show a weakness around your kids. They'll take advantage of you. It's not true. It's actually the way to connection and healing is being honest about it. My kids know, probably way more than they want to in that aspect of my fears. We talk about those things. I'll say something to them like, so you want to watch that horror movie? That's totally fine. Just so you know, there's like these things occurring in this movie, and it's kind of freaking me out that you're going to see dismemberments. Like, is this ridiculous? Like, please, can you help me feel better about this? Because my brain is just thinking it's probably not the best thing for you to see. This is just an example. And my son Devin, for example, said, Mom, I know it's fake. I've seen the making of this movie. I want to see how real it looks because it's fake. And so then when I hear his intention for things, it makes more sense. And so he's like, Mom, I know it's not real. I'm not going to go chop people up. I just want to see how they created this situation. So asking our kids, sharing your fears, and connecting over them is really, really important along this path. You're welcome. Oh, thanks.
Hey, Dayna.
Hi.
As you're homeschooling, unschooling, do you provide any type of structure or order on the subject matter that is being learned? Or do you say like, hey, these are the subjects I think would be helpful for you guys to check out, and this might be useful for you, and here it is, and provide them some kind of foundation for managing their time and their learning schedule and that kind of thing? Do you do any of that, or just allow them to kind of pick and choose what they're going to learn at any given time?
I've never done that, no.
Okay.
So interestingly enough, though, when I first started on this path, started learning about it, I belonged to a lot of Yahoo groups. Do you guys remember those back in the olden days? Way before Facebook? And it was suggested that people that are unschooling, you could get this book series called, like, What Every First Grader Needs to Know, What Every Second Grader Needs to Know. And you could buy the books and see what other kids that age are learning. And then there's something called strewing in the unschooling community. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. But it's leaving things around your house that your kids might bump into and get curious about. So, for example, in one of those books, it said second graders are learning about the U.S. presidents. Now, God, this is before I was an anarchist, so forgive me, guys, please. And so, like, I bought a placemat back then, 15 years ago. It was a long time ago. And, like, they were president placemats, because I'm like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Other kids are learning about this. I'll just throw this down in case they run into it. And it prompted discussion. So if you're somebody who's not ready to completely let go because you're still deschooling and deconditioning, don't feel like you have to go full-on radical like I am and not provide what you're thinking is important right now. There's ways you can do it in a way that's not imposing yourself or your beliefs on your kids, but it's something you want them to have just in case. Interestingly enough, kids run into all of these things in life just naturally when you're facilitating a rich, full life for your children. So it's really important to do that, to provide opportunities for travel and growth. I mean, we have a home rich with books, a library for resources. They have access to computers and technology. They watch documentaries. I mean, when you're living life passionately and you're excited about life yourself, discussions like that come up. Discussions come up all the time about these things that kids are learning in school and what's deemed important. So I think those that are actually unschooling their kids now would agree that the most powerful times is when authentic discussion comes up and you're just talking about things. That's how we all learn, isn't it? When we're talking to somebody that we value and we trust, and they're sharing their thoughts with us about something, and you grow and you expand as a result of that. So that's a great question. And if somebody really thinks that's important, there are ways to do that, like I shared with that book series. After a while, I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't believe in this, and it's something I moved away from, but yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I just want to say God or the spaghetti monster, whoever, bless you for what you're doing. And I've never met anyone that did exactly the same thing I did. And I made it up, like years ago. But you and I could probably talk for the next 12 days about what we've done. But I have want to make a few comments. I I like your basic metaphor of control. That's not my metaphor that I use, but it's really interesting to me. I use the metaphor of attention, because most parents I know that totally F up their kids don't give them attention for just existing. And it's really hard because we've all been deprived of attention and want to get it illegitimately. And in school, they'll only give the kid attention if they do this dumb shit task. They'll give them a pat on the head and an A and a cookie. But other than that, they don't get attention or act out. So that's just one thing that we do differently.
I'd love to just talk on that for a second. I love that you bring that up, because having your presence with your kids is everything, being present. And when people say to me, it's really funny, oh, they're just doing that for attention. It's like, yeah, so why wouldn't you give it to them then?
Right.
Like, think about it. The deprivation of attention in our culture is like, it's like a bad thing. Your child's asking for your attention by doing something. That should be a message to you to connect and give them that. Not it's something, oh, stop trying to get my attention. That's in punishing them for trying to get your attention because they need you to be focused and present. So, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, not just present, you're watching TV or looking at your phone.
Right.
That actually focused, for
Yes.
sure. And also, someone asked me I just don't even know where to go. Someone asked me when I was young, what do you think your kids are going to be when they grow up? And I said, well, considering I'm a radical anarchist hippie, I assume my son is going to be a cop, and my daughter is going to be a mall bunny, right? And so when my son decided, not having heard me say that he was going to grow up, be a policeman, and arrest all my friends for smoking dope, they came to me and said, oh my God, Josh wants to arrest us and turn us all in. And I said, can't you stop him? And I said, well, I wouldn't be much of an anarchist if I told him what he could do, what he could be when he grew up. But I have a Tiffany, but you don't have, Devin never went through the I want to be a cop phase, I assume, right? So, because he's the sweetest person ever.
He's my hippie nature boy, Devin, the oldest one, yeah.
It just didn't happen. He never became a cop because he watched the TV show. We didn't have a TV, but he watched the TV show Law and Order, and he said the cops can arrest him, but the lawyers have to keep him in jail. So he became a lawyer, but he's not, it's not working. This is someone that didn't go to school, right? Went to law school, became a lawyer, and then now he's a woodworker and he fishes. And the law degree is just sitting on the wall.
Wow, that's amazing. But I love a few things of what you shared. For one, when somebody says, how are they ever going to get a job, or how are they going to learn this? The fact that your son didn't go to school, but yet then could become a lawyer, that's huge testament to the life, actually. Because people say that all the time. Could your kids go to college? Could they do this? Of course they can.
Yeah, right.
Self-motivated learning, kids do what they need to do to become what they need to do. They don't need to be forced against their will in school for 12 years to become something like a lawyer. So I love that you shared that. One thing, when people ask me, what do you think your kids will be when they grow up? I love to answer, free and happy. That's what I want. That's my goal. It doesn't matter what they are, what they become, as long as they're free and happy.
Yeah, on that vein, my daughter just got a job really recently, like a month ago, that she competed against 287,000 people for. And they interviewed 7,000, they hired 1,600, and other people had different, many languages, they had higher degrees, PhDs, law degrees. They took her, right, as one of the, you don't need school.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Do you have time for one more?
Yes, I have time for one more question.
Oh, okay. Mine will be short, but I am a mother of 3 teenagers now, and our ages I think are similar because my first was born, actually went into premature labor, I firmly believe, because of Columbine, and I was working in the public schools at that moment. But I guess my question is more in the stage that I'm at right now as a mother, where I did not homeschool, I didn't do unschooling, but I did try to put them in non-traditional programs like Montessori and charter schools, which is a slightly different, but I know it's a similar concept. But my question to you now is, I have a 14, 16, 19-year-old, and I know that they beat to a different drum, and I've tried to expose them to different things, but still let them make their choices. What can I do now at this age for them that, besides giving them the freedom of choice to direct them, I don't know what to do. I'm like at this, I know part of this is just they're teenagers and they're making good choices. They seem to be making good choices, if that's such a thing, but,
So what
and
are,
they're happy.
what are you trying to facilitate in their lives right now?
I don't know, like the whole giving them the freedom of choice. They like to game, they like to program, and I think that's wonderful, and that's what stimulates them and makes them happy, but I'm concerned that their focus is just in that area. And
Well, that's how humans are supposed to be and learn, you know. That's one thing that needs to be undone, is the idea that, see, that's something that school does that's really, really damaging, is the idea that you're supposed to keep like flitting from one thing to the other really quickly. You go from math to English to science and you should shift gears. That's very unnatural. A much more natural approach to anything you're learning is to be obsessed with it and do nothing but that for weeks, if not months, if not years at a time, until you master it. That's how the human mind works.
Okay.
That's the reason they want to do everything but anything else, you know, just constantly be doing that. That's exactly by nature what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay.
And to support that would be really important. So the best thing you can do is work on yourself and letting go of fear surrounding it. So anytime you start to feel the need to control, it's usually always because of fear. So you guys, I want you to notice that in yourselves, whether it's even subtle control, when you have the instinct to control something or stop something or limit something with somebody else, it's always due to a fear. So try to unwind that fear. Byron Katie is a great resource for somebody who's trying to work through fears, and she says things like, you ask yourself, what am I fearing? And then, is that true? So, and then really work through that. So ask yourself, what are you fearing?
Good
And then, is
point.
that true? And then move from there. So it's usually always us. The kids come to this life so naturally. We don't have to do anything for our kids to
Good
thrive
point.
in this environment, in the sense of that this is a very natural way to live. What I'm educating you about is something that you all know already deep down in your body, in your mind, in your soul. You know, and I'm just reawakening it in you. This isn't something that I'm just like sharing to introduce all these new concepts necessarily. You knew this back when you were babies, when you were toddlers, when you were little, when your heart told you that something that was being done to you was wrong, and it felt wrong to be put in the corner, it felt wrong. You were right. You were always right. You just were never supported in that, and you were conditioned and controlled and abused out of thinking that. So I'm only here to say, yeah, you were right all along from when you were little, that all of that was unjust. So I do think that's one of my favorite things that I do, is bring that out in people to say, you know this. You might need help and support with it, but you guys know deep down, if you're here listening to me, there's something inside of you that knows this philosophical approach to be true. And so it's always our own inner work. So your kids are fine. You just have to let go of the fear and find something to do that makes you happy while they're doing that. Yes. Okay.
Very true. Thanks for being here, too.
Thank you. All right, guys, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you having me very much, and thank you for the great questions. And have a wonderful rest of your event. Thank you. Thank you, Joseph.